In the aftermath of former Cuban President Fidel Castro's death, reactions from world leaders have been mixed. While President-elect Donald Trump seemed to be excited, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had kind words to say about the late president, calling him a larger-than-life leader who served his people. Meanwhile, President Barack Obama stayed neutral, only recognizing Castro's, quote, enormous impact. So what is the controversial legacy of Cuba's fallen communist leader? Well, in 1959, Fidel Castro established Cuba as the Western Hemisphere's first communist country, after overthrowing the US-backed military dictator Fulgencio Batista. Castro was a self-declared Marxist-Leninist, and upon taking power, he abolished all private enterprises, strictly limited the amount of land Cubans could own, and gave the state sweeping control over housing and consumer goods. Many rival powers called Castro a tyrant and a dictator, as he shut down opposition newspapers, jailed those who were critical of him, and barred elections. Castro's firm grip on the economy left most Cubans trapped in poverty, and during his nearly 50 years in power, thousands fled to the US. But to many who stayed in Cuba, Castro was actually quite popular. Pro-Castro street art was erected in Havana, and large crowds gathered for his long, unscripted speeches. Castro was celebrated for reducing illiteracy, bringing electricity to rural communities, abolishing legal discrimination, and building schools and medical facilities. Castro's reputation was also complicated abroad. He was a friend to leftist movements in Africa, the Middle East, and other parts of Latin America, as he supported them during the Cold War. For instance, in the 1970s and 80s, Castro deployed tens of thousands of troops to Angola to fight South African apartheid-era forces. Upon hearing of Cuba's intervention, Nelson Mandela issued a statement from jail, praising Castro for being a leader from another continent to help Africans achieve their own freedom rather than trying to take it away. Mandela and Castro remained friends until Mandela's death in 2013. Castro supported similar movements in Mozambique, Ethiopia, Algeria, Yemen, and Libya. But Castro was a bitter rival to many Western powers, predominantly the United States. After he embraced communism and aligned Cuba with the Soviet Union, US leaders labeled him a tyrant and set out to remove him from power through the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, a trade embargo, and allegedly as many as 600 assassination attempts, according to one Cuban counterintelligence officer. During much of Castro's reign, subsidies from the Soviet Union kept Cuba's economy afloat. But when the bloc collapsed in 1991, Cuba's economy crumbled, and the flaws in Castro's Soviet ideology became increasingly apparent. In the last decade of his presidency, Castro stubbornly remained in power even while his reputation diminished both at home and abroad. Finally, in 2008, he stepped down, appointing his brother, Raul, to lead the country. In the end, Castro's legacy, along with his achievements, are best described as mixed. He was a skilled politician admired for uplifting Cuba's poor and supporting leftist movements abroad. But at the same time, Castro was obsessed with holding onto his power, costing him diplomatic ties with the United States, and in many cases, damaging the welfare of the Cuban people. For nearly half a century, Fidel Castro was at the center of the United States' unsavory relationship with Cuba. But ties between the US and Cuba stem back decades before Castro's communist revolution. So what